It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video. Welcome to the first episode of the Throwback Thursday Top 10 Ranking videos. So for those of you that don't know what this is all about, what I have done is introduced a new segment or a new series to the channel where during the off season, when The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead are not airing, what I'm going to do is every Thursday night we're gonna have a Throwback Thursday type of video where I will look at the previous issues of the comics, volumes of the comic, episodes of The Walking Dead and episodes of Fear the Walking Dead, and ranking them. And there's gonna be different types of rankings that we are gonna do during the off seasons. For the very first one, I will be doing a top 10 volumes ranked. So I'll go through all of the volumes of the comic book and rank them. Now, as the name suggests, this is a Throwback Thursday video, so it was supposed to be released last Thursday, but things came up last week and I wasn't able to get this video done on Thursday. But with that said, I will stick with the Thursday schedule for this, and from now on, it will be coming out every Thursday. So with all of that said, let's jump right into this. Let's go from the bottom up. Let's start with number 10. So at number 10, I have volume 28, A Certain Doom. Now for this particular volume, the reason why it's in the list in the first place is that there was a lot of great stories and great twists that were happening during this time. And you know, those stories and those parts of the story that we had in this volume really made this volume pop. Going from the threat of the Whisperers finally dying down, to Negan saving Rick, which was pretty epic when they were stuck in that house together and they were surrounded by walkers, to the moment Negan could regain leadership of the Saviors and he actually put him in line and stopped them from doing anything crazy, but at the same time he didn't want to take over the leadership again. So that was a great part of the story, a great twist in this story for Negan not to want to retake leadership. And then, of course, at the end of the volume, we have Andrea's death. That big kind of issue where we have Rick saying his goodbye to Andrea and everybody doing the same thing. And the preceding issues after that with Rick coping with the death and trying to overcome this huge loss. So there was a lot of great twists and turns in this volume, which earns this volume a number 10 spot in my ranking. Next, at number 9, we have volume 19, March to War. This volume in particular is a very interesting volume because it's basically the setup of the war that we would come to see after it. And in a way, it's just all the communities meeting each other, trying to work together, and you know, setting up a strategy where they can work together to fight the Saviors. So the biggest reason why this volume is at number 9 and it's in my list is because of us getting to see all of these new communities, seeing how they operate, and seeing how Rick and Alexandria are going to work with these communities to build a big network where they can actually have a chance against this big threat called the Saviors. And of course, it was in this volume where we met Ezekiel, the kingdom. We saw more and more of Hilltop. Of course, Jesus was introduced, I think, the volume before, but we definitely did learn more and more about Hilltop, the community Jesus was from. And it was at this point in the story where we began to really feel like this is really a big network of communities that are working together. And, you know, it's very cool that all of these communities are joining and integrating in order to defeat a bigger threat that's out there. That's why this volume earns a number 9 spot in my list. Next up, we have at number 8, volume 20, All Out War Part 1. So for me at least, I see the entire All Out War story as one big unit, as one big story. So I can't help but kind of look at both of the volumes, 20 and 21, which is All Out War Part 1 and Part 2 together. But of course, for the sake of this video, I do have to break it down. And overall, as much as I enjoyed all of All Out War, I enjoyed the second part a bit more than the first part. And, you know, there were definitely things in the first part that makes it a good enough volume to make it to the top 10 list for sure. But at the same time, there are definitely other iconic and more exciting and interesting volumes that have been released that take over this volume in particular. But this volume in particular was what started it all. It started the war with the Saviors. And, you know, it was at this point where we saw our first large-scale war come to life, and where we saw basically a big network of skirmishes and fights and just overall war. And of course, there were some crazy twists and turns in the story in part 1 of All Out War, which definitely earns a spot in this list. Next up, we have at number 7, Volume 1, Days Gone By. What started this all? Now, this volume in particular, I really enjoy. Even though it's the very first volume, and even though there isn't a lot of, you know, very huge fights going on, huge villains, huge kind of stories, it's a smaller story, it's a smaller type of storytelling, but at the same time, it's great because it introduced us to Rick Grimes. We were introduced to the apocalypse in a way. And, you know, it just has that feeling where no matter how much time passes, this volume will definitely be in the top 10 list. It might go up and down, but it will definitely be in the top 10 list, at least for me. And, you know, going back to what I was saying, of course, we were introduced to Rick. We saw, you know, new people. We saw the threat, which was the zombies. So we were introduced to the apocalypse, and we were just invested in Rick's story, and we wanted him to find his family. And more than him trying to survive, it was more about him trying to find his family, which made the story very interesting and very intimate in a way. And I absolutely enjoy and continue to enjoy Volume 1 of the Walking Dead comic book series. And that's why this definitely earns a spot in my top 10 still, even though it was released more than a decade ago. But I absolutely still enjoy this volume, even now. Next up at number 6, we have Volume 16, A Larger World. The biggest reason why this makes it to my list is because we were introduced to the big network of communities that I talked about. Alexandria was one of them, Hilltop, Kingdom. But at the same time, during All Out War, we saw how the network of communities can work together to defeat this big villain, Negan and the Saviors. But what Volume 16 did, which was A Larger World, was actually got us to see that it's not just Alexandria. There are definitely other communities. And more than it being about how they can work together, it was about how much bigger the world is. Based on the title, it's part of a larger world, you know what I mean? And it just shifted the story from that small scale type of storytelling to a much bigger type of story, and one that just expanded the universe in a way. And I absolutely enjoy it. And of course, the larger the world is that we're looking at, the more interesting and exciting stories there are to tell, and the more interesting and exciting characters are going to be introduced. And that's exactly why this volume is at number 6 in my list. Next up at number 5, we have Volume 22, A New Beginning. The first reason is that it had a pretty interesting story to begin with at the start, because the story started in this volume through the eyes of new characters we have never seen before. And of course, this being after All Out War, we were really kind of not sure where the story was going and what was going to happen. And I think that was the twist and turn in this particular volume that really made it exciting. For us not to see the continuation of the story, but to have a brand new story. And for it to be like a soft reboot in a way, which this definitely was. And I love the fact that we saw through the eyes of these new characters what the world looks like now. And if Rick and the other survivors were still trying to survive within a small group, how would they have ended up? Where would they have ended up? And, you know, what are some of the things they would have encountered? And I definitely enjoyed the fact that they did that they made us experience the new world through the eyes of Magna, the leader of this new group. And for us to be comparing Magna's experiences with Rick's experiences, and for those two to kind of work with each other and complement each other in a way where we didn't think we could ever do, you know? At this point in the story, we didn't really think that we would ever experience a brand new story, a brand new, refreshed way of looking at the apocalypse. Something that throws us back to the first volume, where we got introduced to the apocalypse through the eyes of Rick Grimes. So I definitely enjoyed how they did that, and they introduced us to this new story, the new beginning, through the eyes of a new group. And to add to that, of course, we saw our communities expanded, and you know, the fact that they were now a bigger part of a bigger network of communities, even bigger than a larger world. And the fact that Hilltop, Alexandria, and Kingdom have expanded, and you know, there's just a system going on now. It's not just about different communities being out there and working together. It was about different communities being connected and trading and, you know, sending resources back and forth and trying to survive as a unit, and not just trying to survive in different groups and communities, but also working together. So that's why this volume in particular earns number 5 spot in my list. Next up at number 4, volume 11, Fear the Hunters. The Hunters were definitely one of the most interesting and epic and exciting groups of villains that we've seen in the comic book. In the show, they didn't really live up to expectations. They were still great, but they didn't really live up to the expectations that was set in the comic book with the Hunters. And of course, in the TV show, they were the Termites, and in the comics, they were the Hunters. This particular volume was very exciting, and it earns a number 4 spot in my list, because not only did we see a villain that was twisted, that we never seen before, we saw how far people would go in this world to survive, and we saw some crazy storylines. And one of the most epic scenes in the entire series for me is what happened in the woods in this volume, where we have the Hunters being surrounded by the survivors, and the survivors are playing with them, and Andrea is just shooting the fingers off of the main leader, Gareth, and they're in a way slowly torturing them. And it was just interesting to see how everything kind of shifted at that point. And you could very well say that Rick and the others at that point were becoming much like the enemies that they've encountered. This volume was definitely an exciting and interesting volume because of the twists and turns it had in terms of who this new group were, how Rick and the others were countering their threat. So that's why this volume definitely makes it to the list as well. At number 3, we have volume 23, Whispers into Screams. This volume I absolutely enjoyed. I mean, I've always said this. The introduction of the Whisperers is and will maybe forever be my favorite story in the comic book. Not only because it's a new type of threat again, that's different than the other threats that we've seen, much like the Hunters, but at the same time, it's just how massive the threat is and how different the threat is, and also the unique way that this new threats were introduced definitely made this volume a great one. And also, we got some iconic characters coming from this volume and this story that are still up to this point our favorites, from Alpha to Beta to even Lydia, if you think about it. But this volume definitely was a turning point in the story, in my opinion. I think The Walking Dead's comic book has had 3 main points in the story where it's just a turning point in the story. One was a larger world, one was a new beginning, and one is Whispers into Screams. I think these 3 were the points in the story, or the kind of bookmarks in the story, where we have a point in the story where things shift like they have never done before, and they just move the story in a completely new direction. So these 3 volumes definitely were kind of turning points in the story, and that's why they were so exciting. That's why volume 23 earns a spot at number 3. At number 2, we have volume 21, All Out War Part 2. Now, most of what I said about volume 1 being a great one applies to part 2 as well, but I just think part 2 had a lot more twists and turns and exciting stories that definitely earns it a number 2 spot. One of them was the shocking ending where we had Rick not killing Negan and letting him live. And in a way, that was just a point in the story where it was unexpected and we didn't see coming. And I definitely enjoyed and loved what they did at the end of this volume to give it a fresh and unique ending. So volume 21, All Out War Part 2, makes it at number 2 spot. And then at number 1, we have volume 17, Something to Fear. Of course, I think many fans believe this volume is the best volume ever released on The Walking Dead, and I definitely agree. This volume not only introduced us to the biggest, baddest villain that The Walking Dead has ever seen, Negan, but also it was just the vibe that it had. It was just about not knowing exactly who this new group were and how many of them were, and how to deal with this threat. Much like the Whisperers, when Negan and the Saviors were introduced, it was a different type of ball game, and I think that had a lot to do with why this volume in particular was so exciting and interesting, and why it was so epic in the first place. And I think even at this point, this volume is one of the volumes where it has a lot of reread value, because if you go back to it and still reread the volume, you enjoy it and you feel the emotions that you did back when you read it the first time. So that's it for this video. See you next time for another super video. If you like what you see, press like, subscribe for more content, and press the bell button to receive notifications for daily uploads. Like and follow the Facebook page of this channel to join our community, and check out the upload schedule to learn more about daily uploads.